"Wait, let me take it off," she said. The rancher froze and everything changed. Wild West stories. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the wide-open fields where cattle grazed lazily, the occasional fly buzzing around their horns. Eli Thompson, a man whose reputation for toughness preceded him in every town within 50 miles, sat on the porch of his modest ranch house, chewing slowly on a piece of straw. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert as always, though the ranch had been quiet for weeks. The wind brought with it the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth, mingling with the smell of cattle and leather. For Eli, life had been a series of routines, predictable and steady, which suited him just fine. Eli had spent most of his life in these parts. He had grown up on a ranch not far from this one, learning the hard way what it meant to survive on the frontier. His father had been a strict man, expecting Eli and his siblings to work from sunup to sundown, tending cattle, mending fences, and fixing broken equipment. Eli had inherited that work ethic, along with the sharp instincts that came from years of dealing with the unpredictable land and weather. His reputation was built on quiet strength and reliability. People knew him as a man who could handle anything, yet one who rarely shared his thoughts or feelings. His life had been a solitary one for many years. After the loss of his parents, Eli had chosen to keep to himself, focusing on the ranch and the cattle. Neighbors came and went, and a few tried to strike up friendships, but Eli had learned early that trust was earned, not given. Over time, the small town surrounding the ranch had grown accustomed to seeing him work alone, always efficient, always quiet. Children would sometimes sneak by to watch him brand cattle or mend fences, but even they were careful not to disturb him. Eli was a man who respected silence and order, and he expected the same from others. It was during this particular afternoon that the peace of the ranch was broken by the sound of hooves in the distance. Eli's eyes narrowed as he squinted against the sun. Dust swirled in the dry air, and through it he could make out the figure of a rider, a woman traveling alone. At first he thought she might be lost. There weren't many travelers who dared these trails without company, especially not women. As she approached, Eli noticed the determination in her posture, the steady grip on the reins, and the weariness etched into her face. Clara Bennett, as she would soon be known to Eli, had been on the move for days. She had left the safety of a nearby town after a series of events that had left her no choice but to seek refuge elsewhere. She was not accustomed to relying on others, and yet something had told her that she could not continue alone. Her horse, tired and lathered with sweat, seemed to understand the urgency of their journey. Clara guided the animal carefully, her eyes scanning the land as if expecting danger around every bend. She had heard stories of ranchers who were kind and willing to offer shelter, and Eli Thompson's ranch had been mentioned more than once by travelers she had met along the way. When she finally reached the entrance to Eli's ranch, she called out, her voice carrying over the fields. Eli, alert but cautious, stepped down from the porch and approached. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and hands calloused from years of hard labor. His eyes, sharp and observant, studied her carefully. Clara stopped a few feet away, keeping her distance, her horse resting slightly behind her. She did not appear threatening, but Eli had learned that appearances could be deceiving. "Afternoon," she said, tipping her hat slightly, though her voice carried a mix of confidence and fatigue. "I'm looking for shelter. I've been traveling for some time and I need a place to rest." Eli's first instinct was caution. Travelers, especially those alone, could bring trouble whether intentionally or not. But there was something about her, the way she held herself, the steady way she spoke, that made him pause. There was a spark of resilience, of determination, that reminded him of the younger people who had grown up on the frontier, learning to face the harsh realities of life head-on. "I don't usually take in strangers," Eli said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You're welcome to water your horse and rest in the shade, but I'll need to know more before you stay here." Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken rules of frontier hospitality. She dismounted carefully, leading her horse to the trough. The animal drank eagerly, and Clara leaned against the wooden fence, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't mean any trouble," she said softly. "I just need a place to get back on my feet." As the afternoon wore on, Eli observed her silently. He noticed the calluses on her hands, the way her boots were worn from hard travel, and the careful movements she made around the horse. There was no pretense in her actions, no attempt to impress. She simply did what needed to be done. Eli, who had spent years judging people by their actions rather than words, found himself intrigued. He decided to allow her to stay the night, offering her a small cabin near the edge of the property. It was modest, with a wooden floor, a small bed, and a fireplace, but it was clean and safe. Clara thanked him quietly, her relief visible in the way her shoulders relaxed. As she unpacked a few belongings, Eli returned to the porch, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. There was something about her arrival that felt different, something that stirred a sense of curiosity he had not felt in years. That evening, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. Eli prepared a simple meal, and though he did not invite Clara to join him, she appeared at the cabin door shortly after sunset. They shared the meal in companionable silence, the crackling of the fire filling the gaps where words were not yet needed. For Eli, the presence of another human being in his solitary life was unusual, and he found himself studying her expressions, noticing the flicker of determination and the shadows of weariness in her eyes. The night was quiet, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant coyote. Clara lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She had faced dangers, uncertainties, and moments of fear, yet she felt a strange sense of safety on this ranch. Eli, in his own cabin, sat with a lantern casting long shadows on the walls, thinking about the unexpected turn of events. A stranger had arrived on his land, and though he had initially been cautious, he found himself curious about her story, about the life she had lived, and about the strength she carried quietly within her. By the time morning came, a subtle connection had formed between them, unspoken but undeniable. The ranch, which had always been a place of routine and solitude for Eli, now held the promise of change, though neither of them could yet see what lay ahead. The air was crisp with the promise of a new day, the fields stretching endlessly under the brightening sky. Eli prepared for the day's work, and Clara, eager to prove her worth, stepped outside to help, her movements careful but confident. It was the beginning of a story neither of them had anticipated, a story of survival, courage, and unexpected companionship, set against the harsh, beautiful backdrop of the Wild West. In the days to come, both Eli and Clara would face challenges that would test their resolve, their courage, and their ability to trust one another. But for now, there was only the quiet rhythm of the ranch, the sound of cattle lowing in the fields, and the unspoken understanding that life was about to change in ways neither of them could yet imagine. As Eli watched Clara work with the animals, adjusting the fence, feeding the livestock, and moving with an ease that belied her apparent inexperience, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. It was curiosity, yes, but also a cautious hope. In Clara, he saw resilience, determination, and a quiet strength that mirrored his own in unexpected ways. And though neither of them would admit it yet, the arrival of the woman on the ranch marked the beginning of a journey that would forever alter the course of their lives. The day ended much like it began, with the sun sinking behind the hills and the ranch bathed in golden light. Clara tended to her horse one last time, brushing the sweat from its coat and offering soft words of comfort. Eli, observing from a distance, felt the weight of years of solitude pressing against him. yet softened by the presence of someone who was not only surviving but thriving in the harsh environment he had long considered his domain alone. It was a quiet evening, yet it held within it the first sparks of change. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, had become the setting for a story of courage, resilience, and human connection. And for Eli Thompson, the rugged rancher who had faced countless challenges in his life, the arrival of Clara Bennett was a reminder that even in the most isolated places, life had a way of surprising those who were willing to open themselves to it. The morning sun rose slowly over the sprawling fields of the ranch, casting a soft golden light across the land. The air was still cool, carrying the faint scent of dew on the grass and the earthy aroma of the cattle pens. Clara Bennett stepped outside, stretching her arms and letting the crisp air fill her lungs. She had slept well for the first time in days, the quiet of the ranch providing a rare sense of safety. Her horse, tethered nearby, grazed peacefully, unaware of the tension that had followed her journey. Eli Thompson was already hard at work. He had risen before dawn, as was his habit, and moved with the calm efficiency that came from years of experience. He inspected the fences, checked the gates, and ensured the cattle were accounted for. The work was steady, repetitive, and demanding, yet Eli moved through it with a sense of purpose. His eyes occasionally flicked toward Clara, who had begun her morning chores with quiet determination. She fed the smaller animals first, then moved to the cattle, brushing them and checking for signs of illness or injury. Eli noted the care and attention she gave, impressed despite himself. "Morning," Eli said without looking up from the fence he was repairing. His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of authority but also a hint of welcome. "Morning," Clara replied, her voice soft but confident. "Didn't know the cattle would need checking so early." Eli finally looked at her, his sharp eyes taking in her movements. "Cattle don't follow schedules. You learn that quickly if you want to run a ranch." His tone was matter-of-fact, yet there was a subtle warmth beneath it. Clara nodded, understanding that the words were both advice and a challenge. As the morning progressed, Clara proved herself capable. She learned quickly, picking up skills that Eli had assumed would take weeks to teach. She mended small sections of the fence under his watchful eye, fed the animals without prompting, and even managed to coax a stubborn calf back into its pen. Eli observed silently, his mind gradually softening. He was a man accustomed to solitude, yet he found himself appreciating the presence of someone who was not only willing to work, but also showed thoughtfulness and care. By mid-morning, the sun had risen higher, warming the air and casting long shadows across the ranch. Eli and Clara paused briefly by the barn, wiping sweat from their foreheads. Eli handed her a jug of water, which she accepted with a grateful smile. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment a quiet understanding passed between them, a mutual respect born of shared effort and perseverance. "You're learning fast," Eli said, his tone betraying a hint of surprise. "Most people can't keep up with the work even for a day." Clara shrugged lightly, her expression serious. "I had to learn fast once before. I can handle hard work." Her words carried a weight, an unspoken reference to the difficult past she rarely spoke of. Eli noticed the firmness in her tone, the way she did not seek sympathy or praise. There was a strength in her, quiet but undeniable, that reminded him of the frontier itself, harsh, demanding, yet resilient. As the day went on, the rhythm of ranch life continued. Clara helped Eli herd cattle to the northern pasture, her movements careful but confident. She learned to read the subtle signals of the animals, to anticipate their behavior, and to move with patience rather than force. Eli was impressed by her ability to adapt, but there was something else he noticed, an unspoken tension, a hint of something she kept hidden beneath her steady exterior. Later that afternoon, while repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, Clara bent to tie a loose wire. As she adjusted her sleeve, Eli caught a glimpse of a scar on her forearm. It was long and faint, running from her wrist toward her elbow, a mark of some past injury. He froze for a moment, not out of fear but recognition. The sight stirred memories he had long kept buried, memories of a past he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Clara noticed his hesitation and straightened, a faint frown crossing her face. "It's nothing," she said quietly, covering the scar again with her sleeve. "Old injury from long ago." Her voice was steady, but Eli could sense the weight behind her words. She was not hiding it out of shame, but perhaps out of habit, a natural caution from a life where vulnerability could be dangerous. Eli nodded, not pressing further. He had learned over the years that some stories were shared only when the person was ready. He returned to his work, though his mind lingered on the scar. There was a story behind it, one of courage and struggle, and he felt a deep curiosity mixed with respect. The moment passed, but a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. Trust had begun to take root, fragile but real. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, a gentle wind stirred the prairie grasses, carrying with it the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Clara prepared the animals for the night, ensuring they had water and shelter. Eli gathered tools and supplies, moving with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of experience. They worked side by side, their movements in harmony, though neither spoke much. There was comfort in the silence, a growing understanding that they were learning from one another in ways neither had anticipated. By nightfall, the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, the first stars beginning to twinkle above. The air cooled, carrying the faint scent of earth and pine. Clara returned to her cabin, tired but satisfied with the day's work. She lit a small lantern and sat by the window, reflecting on the events of the day. The ranch was unlike anywhere she had ever been, harsh, demanding, yet strangely comforting. Eli Thompson, the solitary rancher, had shown her a quiet kindness that she had rarely encountered in her life. She felt a cautious hope, a sense that perhaps she had found a place where she could belong, even if only temporarily. Eli, in his own cabin, sat by the fireplace, the glow of the flames casting shadows across the wooden walls. He thought about Clara, about her strength, her determination, and the subtle tension that lingered between them. Her presence had stirred something within him, a curiosity and concern he had not expected. He had spent years keeping others at a distance, yet he found himself wondering about her story, about the experiences that had shaped her, and about the resilience she displayed so quietly. Over the next several days, Clara settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose with the sun, worked alongside Eli in the fields, tended to the animals, and learned the practical skills necessary to maintain the ranch. Each day brought small challenges, fixing a broken fence, guiding stubborn cattle, and managing the unpredictable weather. But Clara met them with determination. Eli continued to observe her, silently noting her adaptability and the care she took in every task. Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared effort rather than words. Clara learned to anticipate Eli's instructions, and Eli learned to trust her judgment. They shared quiet moments over meals, sometimes exchanging stories about their pasts, though both remained cautious. Clara spoke sparingly of her life before the ranch, hinting at struggles and hardships without revealing every detail. Eli, in turn, remained reserved, offering glimpses of his past only in small, careful ways. One afternoon, as they worked near the river that ran along the edge of the property, Clara paused to wash her hands in the cool water. Eli watched silently, noting the grace in her movements and the determination in her eyes. The sunlight reflected off the water, highlighting the subtle strength she carried. It was in these moments, simple and quiet, that Eli began to appreciate the depth of her character. She was not only capable and brave but also resilient in ways that matched, and sometimes surpassed, his own. That evening, a storm approached, rolling in from the distant hills. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. Clara and Eli worked quickly to secure the animals and reinforce the fences. The urgency of the situation forced them to cooperate in ways that required trust and coordination. Clara's calm under pressure impressed Eli, and he began to see her not just as a helper, but as an equal partner in managing the ranch. When the first drops of rain began to fall, they took shelter under the porch, watching the storm unfold. The rain pelted the roof and soaked the surrounding fields, the sound both powerful and soothing. Clara glanced at Eli, who stood silently, his expression unreadable. "You've handled this before," she said quietly, a hint of admiration in her voice. Eli nodded. "I've had my share of storms. You did well, too." His words were simple, but they carried weight. It was the first time he had acknowledged her abilities in such a direct way, and Clara felt a quiet sense of pride. The storm passed, leaving the air fresh and cool, and the ranch bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun breaking through the clouds. By the end of that week, Clara had fully integrated into the daily life of the ranch. Eli, once a solitary man, began to notice the small ways in which her presence enriched his life. He found himself anticipating her actions, appreciating her contributions, and feeling a subtle shift in the rhythm of his days. Trust, respect, and understanding were taking root, laying the foundation for something neither of them could have predicted when Clara first arrived. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as they tended to the animals and prepared for the night, that the first true moment of connection occurred. Clara, exhausted from a long day, paused and said softly, "Eli, I want to thank you for letting me stay. For everything." Eli, caught off guard by the sincerity in her voice, felt a warmth in his chest that he had not experienced in years. It was a simple moment, yet profound, a recognition of mutual respect, courage, and the beginning of a bond that would grow stronger with time. The days that followed continued in the same steady rhythm, each one reinforcing the connection between them. Work was hard, the land demanding, and the cattle unpredictable, yet together they faced each challenge with determination and quiet confidence. Eli and Clara had begun to form a partnership, built on trust, mutual respect, and the shared experience of life on the frontier. The tension that had been present initially began to transform into something deeper, a bond that neither had anticipated, but both were beginning to welcome. The morning after the storm dawned crisp and clear, with the sun breaking over the horizon and scattering the remaining clouds across the sky. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass, a comforting reminder that the worst of the weather had passed. Clara stepped outside her cabin, taking a deep breath and savoring the calm. The storm had been intense, but the ranch had endured, just as she and Eli had endured it together. There was an unspoken bond forming between them now, strengthened by the shared challenges of the previous days. Eli was already up, moving with his usual purposeful efficiency. He had checked the fences and made sure the cattle were safe before the sun had fully risen. As Clara approached with a pail of water for the horses, he glanced up and offered a brief nod. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, a quiet acknowledgement that she was a partner in this life now, not merely a guest. The day began with routine tasks, yet there was a subtle tension in the air. Clara had sensed it earlier when Eli had caught a glimpse of her scar, but neither had spoken about it directly. That moment had lingered in both their minds. Eli had paused, frozen for the briefest instant, and Clara had covered the mark quickly. The scar was a part of her story, one she had learned to conceal from most people. But now she could feel the weight of his gaze, a silent curiosity and concern she could not ignore. While tending to the animals, Clara finally decided to speak. She was hesitant, her voice quiet but firm. "Eli, about the other day," she began, adjusting her sleeve carefully. "I think it's time you know." I don't usually talk about it, but I guess you should understand why I've come all this way." Eli paused, leaning on the fence post, his eyes steady on hers. He could sense the struggle in her words, the effort it took to reveal something personal, and he waited patiently, giving her the space to continue. Clara took a deep breath. "I had a dangerous employer in the town I came from. He treated people badly and I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to leave before things got worse. The journey here wasn't easy. I had to fend for myself and I had to learn to trust no one. But I kept going because I had to survive." Her words were deliberate, measured, yet carried an undercurrent of fear and courage intertwined. She paused, glancing down at her hands before meeting Eli's gaze again. "The scar you saw, it's from an accident while escaping. Nothing I'm ashamed of, but it reminds me of how close I came to failing." Eli listened, silent but attentive. His expression was calm, yet there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes. He had known hardship himself, had faced danger and loss countless times, and he could recognize the strength it took to endure what Clara had endured. In that moment, he realized that her bravery was not just physical, it was emotional. She had faced fear, survived, and continued forward. It was a courage he respected deeply. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant creak of a gate, filled the silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence, but one heavy with understanding. Finally, Eli spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "You've been through a lot, I can see that. It takes a strong person to come this far and keep moving forward." His words were simple, but Clara felt the sincerity in them. It was the first time someone had acknowledged her struggle without pity, without judgment. The acknowledgment brought a subtle shift between them. Clara's tension eased slightly, and Eli felt an unfamiliar warmth, a sense of connection he had not allowed himself in years. The scar, once a source of hidden pain, had become a bridge between them, a symbol of resilience and courage that they both recognized. It was a turning point, the moment when their relationship began to deepen beyond mere partnership in work. That afternoon, as they repaired a section of the fence damaged by the storm, Clara moved with careful precision. Eli watched her, noting the ease with which she adapted to the physical demands of the ranch. Her strength was apparent, but so was her attention to detail and her care for the animals. It was clear that she did not just work to survive. She worked because she cared, because she wanted to do things right. Eli admired that, silently acknowledging that her character was as strong as her hands. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the land. The ranch was alive with activity. The cattle moved slowly toward the pasture, the horses grazed peacefully, and the wind carried the familiar scents of leather, hay, and earth. Clara and Eli worked in rhythm, their movements coordinated without words. It was in this quiet cooperation that trust continued to grow. Each task they completed side by side, each problem they solved together, strengthened the bond between them. Later in the day, Eli decided to show Clara some of the older parts of the ranch. He led her through the fields, pointing out the spots where the fences needed reinforcement, the areas where the soil was most fertile, and the hidden water sources that were crucial for survival in the dry season. Clara listened attentively, absorbing every word, every instruction. She asked questions when necessary, demonstrating a keen understanding and an eagerness to learn. Eli found himself quietly impressed, realizing that her intelligence and adaptability matched her physical courage. As they approached a small grove near the edge of the property, Clara paused, glancing at the trees and the soft light filtering through the leaves. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, almost to herself. Eli followed her gaze, taking in the view. The land was rugged and wild, yet there was a quiet serenity in its open spaces, a beauty that could be found only in the untamed frontier. It was a reminder of why he had chosen this life, and now, perhaps, why she had sought refuge here as well. In the grove, they found a small stream, its water clear and cool. Clara knelt to fill a canteen, her reflection shimmering in the surface. Eli stood behind her, his thoughts drifting back to the conversation they had shared earlier. He realized that he had begun to trust her, to value her presence not just for her work, but for who she was as a person. She had faced dangers he could hardly imagine, and yet she remained composed, determined, and remarkably resilient. The quiet of the grove was broken by the sound of movement behind them. A young calf had wandered off from the main herd, and Eli and Clara worked together to guide it back safely. The task required patience and careful coordination, and they communicated with a combination of gestures and short words. When the calf was finally secured, Clara exhaled in relief, and Eli allowed himself a small smile. It was a simple victory, but it reinforced the growing partnership between them. As evening approached, the ranch settled into its usual rhythm. The animals were fed, the gates secured, and the tools stored for the night. Clara returned to her cabin, weary but content. She reflected on the events of the day, realizing that she had begun to feel a sense of belonging. The harshness of her past still lingered in her mind, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet hope that she might build a new life here. Eli, in his cabin, sat by the fire, the flickering light casting shadows across his face. He thought about Clara, about the courage she had displayed, and about the subtle shift in his own feelings. He had lived a life of solitude for many years, trusting no one and relying only on himself. Yet her presence had begun to challenge that isolation, slowly breaking down the walls he had built around his heart. The recognition of her strength, her resilience, and her quiet determination stirred something within him that he had long thought dormant. That night, a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and earth through the cabins. Clara lay awake for a while, thinking about the events that had unfolded over the past days. She had shared a part of her past with Eli, something she had kept hidden from nearly everyone. His reaction had been calm, respectful, and understanding, unlike anything she had experienced before. It was a small moment, but it carried great significance, a validation of her courage and a promise of the trust that was beginning to grow between them. The following morning brought new tasks, new challenges, and new opportunities for collaboration. Eli and Clara moved through the ranch with a sense of rhythm and purpose, their partnership becoming more apparent with each passing day. They faced difficulties, stubborn cattle, broken fences, and unpredictable weather, but together they met each challenge with determination and mutual respect. One afternoon, while tending to the animals near the northern pasture, Clara stumbled slightly, her sleeve slipping back and revealing the scar once more. Eli froze, his memory of the first glimpse returning vividly. But this time there was no fear, no hesitation, only recognition and empathy. The scar was no longer just a mark of past suffering. It was a symbol of endurance, of survival, and of courage that both of them could respect. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Words were unnecessary. The shared experiences, the dangers faced, and the courage displayed had created a bond that went beyond mere companionship. They were beginning to trust one another in ways neither had anticipated, recognizing strength, resilience, and humanity in each other that had long been hidden from the world. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eli and Clara completed their day's work. The animals were secured, the fences repaired, and the land quiet once more. They stood together for a moment, watching the horizon, feeling the unspoken connection that had grown between them. It was a bond forged not by words, but by actions, courage, and mutual respect. And in that quiet, shared understanding, both of them knew that their lives were changing. The past could not be erased, but it could be honored. The future was uncertain, but it was now something they could face together, strengthened by the trust and courage they had discovered in one another. The days after Clara had shared her past flowed in a rhythm that was both familiar and new. The ranch settled into its daily routines, yet something subtle had shifted in the air. Tasks that had once felt purely like work now carried a quiet sense of partnership. Eli noticed it in the way Clara approached each chore with confidence, in the care she gave to the animals, and in the way she moved through the fields with purpose. Clara, in turn, sensed the changes in Eli. His watchful eyes softened. His instructions carried not just authority but a hint of encouragement, and there were moments when his guard seemed to drop just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the rugged exterior. One morning, Eli decided they would tackle the northern pasture together. It had been overgrown during the rainy season, and parts of the fence had weakened under the weight of wind and water. The work was difficult, requiring heavy lifting, precise measurement, and careful placement of posts and wires. Clara approached the task with determination, taking each instruction seriously and executing it with surprising skill. Eli watched her silently for long stretches, occasionally offering advice but mostly allowing her space to prove herself. "You've got a knack for this," he said at one point, wiping sweat from his brow. His words were simple, yet there was a sincerity in his tone that made Clara pause for a moment, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I learned to adapt," she replied, adjusting the tension on a wire. "You have to if you want to survive." Her eyes met his briefly, and in that glance, Eli saw the same determination reflected in her that he had cultivated in himself over the years. It was a rare quality, and one he had come to respect deeply. As the day wore on, the work continued with the steady rhythm of two people moving in sync. There were moments of laughter when a stubborn post refused to stay upright, or when a wayward calf darted across the field. These small shared experiences were building a sense of camaraderie between them, a foundation for trust that went beyond the practical needs of ranch life. Eli found himself talking more than usual, sharing stories of the ranch, the land, and the lessons he had learned over the years. Clara listened attentively, asking questions and offering insights of her own. By midday, the sun had climbed high in the sky, turning the fields golden and hot. Eli suggested they take a break near the edge of the pasture, where a cluster of trees offered shade and a small stream trickled through the rocks. Clara sat on a fallen log, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, while Eli poured water into 2 tin cups. They drank in silence for a moment, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the water. "You've changed things around here," Clara said finally, her voice thoughtful. "Not just the work but the feel of the place. It's quieter, somehow calmer." Eli considered her words carefully. "This land has always been quiet. Maybe it just needed someone to notice it." There was a pause, then he added, "You've done more than I expected. I wasn't sure how you'd fit in, but you're proving yourself." His tone was honest, measured, and for the first time, Clara sensed a genuine warmth behind it. The afternoon brought new challenges. A group of stray cattle had wandered close to the creek, drawn by the fresh water left by the recent rains. Clara and Eli moved quickly, rounding them up before they could stray too far or cause damage to the fences. The work required quick thinking, calm voices, and coordinated movements. Eli found himself relying on Clara's judgment, impressed by her ability to anticipate the animal's behavior and respond effectively. There was a mutual respect growing between them, one that was built not on words but on actions, courage, and trust. By the time the cattle were safely back in the pen, the sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the fields. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow, her muscles aching from the day's labor, but her spirit remained undimmed. Eli leaned against a fence post, watching her carefully, noting the way she carried herself with strength and determination. He realized that his initial impressions of her had only scratched the surface. She was resilient, intelligent and capable, a partner in every sense of the word. As evening approached, Eli suggested they check the perimeter of the ranch together. The wind had shifted during the day, bringing cooler air from the north, and he wanted to ensure all gates were secure and that no animals had escaped. They moved along the fence lines, working methodically and efficiently. The quiet of the evening was broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the lowing of distant cattle. The shared silence was comfortable, a testament to the growing bond between them. During the walk, Clara stumbled on a loose stone and Eli reached out instinctively to steady her. Their hands brushed, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of something unspoken, a connection that neither had yet named but both could feel. Clara pulled back slightly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, while Eli allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a moment of subtle intimacy, born from shared experience and quiet understanding, rather than words or declarations. Later that night, after the animals were settled and the tools put away, they sat by the cabin's fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across the wooden walls, illuminating their faces in warm light. Clara took a seat across from Eli, who was sharpening a tool in his hands. They spoke of trivial matters at first, the weather, the work, the condition of the cattle, but gradually the conversation deepened. Clara shared more about her journey, about the moments of fear and uncertainty she had faced, and about the small victories that had kept her moving forward. Eli listened intently, offering only brief interjections, but each word carried weight and understanding. "You've been through a lot," Eli said quietly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Most people wouldn't have made it this far on their own." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I had to. There was no other choice, but I'm glad I found this place. I'm glad I found you." Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth of meaning that Eli could not ignore. He felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of connection that he had not experienced in years. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of companionship, of trust, and perhaps even something more. The following days brought new challenges. A section of the northern fence had been damaged further by the storm, requiring more repairs. The cattle were restless after the rain, and the soil had become soft and difficult to work with. Clara and Eli faced each task with determination, working side by side in the sun, their movements coordinated through experience and growing familiarity. The bond between them strengthened with each shared challenge, each small victory, and each quiet moment of understanding. One afternoon, as they repaired the fence together, a hawk swooped down low over the fields, startling a few of the cattle. Clara reacted quickly, guiding the animals back toward safety, while Eli adjusted the fence posts to prevent them from escaping. The coordination between them was seamless, the trust implicit. Eli found himself glancing at Clara more often, noticing the subtle expressions on her face, the way she moved with purpose and confidence. He realized that her presence was no longer merely tolerated, it was valued, and in many ways indispensable. By the end of the week, the ranch was in better shape than it had been in months. The fences were sturdy, the animals were secure, and the fields showed signs of careful tending. Clara and Eli stood together at the edge of the property, surveying their work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and the wind carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. There was a quiet satisfaction in the air, a sense of accomplishment and partnership that neither had anticipated when Clara had first arrived. Eli broke the silence. "You've done more than I expected. The ranch feels alive again." His voice was calm, yet there was an unmistakable warmth beneath it. Clara smiled, a small but genuine expression of pride and happiness. "I'm glad to help. I feel like I belong here, more than I have anywhere in a long time." That evening, as they prepared for nightfall, Clara noticed a subtle change in Eli's demeanor. He was less guarded, more open, and yet still quietly strong. She realized that their partnership had grown into something deeper, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a connection that had begun to shape the rhythm of their days and the comfort of their nights. The following week, they faced new tests. A sudden thunderstorm rolled across the plains, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Trees bent under the force of the gusts, and the cattle became restless. Clara and Eli worked tirelessly to secure the animals and reinforce the fences. The storm tested not only their skills, but also their ability to work together under pressure. Each decision was made quickly, each action coordinated with precision. By the time the storm passed, they were exhausted but successful, having protected the ranch and the animals from damage. In the aftermath, as the sun broke through the clouds and cast light over the wet fields, they stood together, breathing heavily and taking in the scene. Eli looked at Clara, his expression a mixture of respect, gratitude, and something deeper that he was only beginning to understand. Clara, in turn, felt a surge of admiration and affection for the man who had become her partner, her mentor, and in ways she could not yet name, a source of comfort and trust. That night, as they sat by the fire once more, the warmth of the flames mirrored the growing warmth between them. Words were spoken sparingly, yet each carried meaning. There was laughter over small stories, reflections on the day's work, and moments of quiet understanding. Clara felt a sense of safety she had not known in years, and Eli felt a connection that he had long thought impossible. It was in these quiet, shared moments that the true depth of their bond became evident. Work had brought them together, challenges had strengthened their trust, and shared experiences had allowed them to see one another clearly, beyond the surface of appearances. They were no longer simply rancher and guest. They were partners, allies, and perhaps something more, though neither dared to define it just yet. The days grew longer as summer stretched across the frontier, bringing warmth, light, and a renewed energy to the ranch. Clara and Eli moved through the land with a rhythm that had become natural, each knowing the other's habits, strengths, and patterns. The bond they had developed over weeks of work, trust, and quiet understanding had become undeniable. There was a comfort in their companionship that neither had experienced before, a sense that together they could face anything the land, or life, threw at them. It was during one bright morning, as they worked near the southern fields, that the true test of their partnership arrived. A band of rustlers had been reported in the area, and rumors suggested they were moving toward the ranchlands. Eli's instincts, honed from years on the frontier, told him that preparation and vigilance were essential. Clara, sensing his tension, moved beside him, ready to help in any way she could. She had learned much from Eli, not just about ranch work, but about assessing situations, reading people, and responding with calm determination. Eli surveyed the horizon, noting the tracks in the dirt that indicated the rustlers' approach. Clara leaned on the fence beside him, her eyes scanning the fields with quiet intensity. "We can't let them take the cattle," she said firmly. "We'll need to be ready." Eli nodded, appreciating her resolve. "We'll protect the ranch," he said. Together, it was the first time he had verbalized the partnership in such a direct way, and Clara felt a surge of confidence and reassurance. They moved quickly, setting traps, securing gates, and preparing the animals for possible danger. Every action was coordinated, every movement deliberate. It was a dance of experience and trust, a test of their courage and cooperation. As the sun climbed higher, the rustlers appeared on the horizon. They were a small group, but experienced and dangerous. Eli and Clara moved with purpose, using the land to their advantage. Clara guided the cattle into a secure enclosure while Eli positioned himself at key vantage points. The rustlers attempted to rush forward, but the careful planning and quick thinking of Eli and Clara thwarted their efforts. Through careful coordination, the intruders were forced to retreat, realizing they could not succeed against the prepared defenders. After the rustlers had gone, Eli and Clara stood together in the fields, catching their breath. The adrenaline had subsided, leaving only a sense of triumph and relief. Eli looked at Clara, noticing the sweat on her brow, the dirt on her hands, and the fire in her eyes. He felt a deep admiration, not only for her bravery but for the unwavering spirit that had carried her through every challenge. "You handled yourself well," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of genuine respect. Clara met his gaze, smiling faintly. "We handled it," she corrected, "together." The moment was simple yet profound, marking the culmination of weeks of growing trust, partnership, and understanding. The following days brought a calmer routine. The excitement of the rustler encounter had faded, replaced by the familiar rhythm of ranch life. Clara and Eli worked side by side, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and maintaining the land. Yet there was a new dimension to their interactions, a warmth, a connection, and a subtle affection that had grown beneath the surface. They no longer needed words to communicate. A glance, a gesture, or a shared task conveyed more than speech ever could. One evening, as the sun began to set, Eli invited Clara to walk with him to the hill overlooking the ranch. From this vantage point, the land stretched out in every direction, golden fields merging with forests and distant hills. The sight was breathtaking, and Clara felt a deep sense of peace and belonging. She realized that this place and the man who had guided her into it had become more than a refuge. They were a new beginning. Eli broke the silence. "It's different now," he said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "The ranch feels alive, and not just because of the work. Things have changed." Clara looked at him, sensing the depth behind his words. "I know," she replied softly. "It's because we've been through so much together. We've faced danger, weather, and challenges, and we've come through stronger." Eli nodded, turning to look at her. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Finally, Eli spoke, his voice low but steady. "I've lived a long time alone. I thought I was fine that way, but you've changed things. You've made me see that life can be more than just survival." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She had spent so long hiding, fearing danger, and trusting no one. Yet, Eli's presence had become a constant, a steadying force, and now, hearing him speak so openly, she felt a deep connection that she had never known before. "And you've changed me," she said softly. "You've made me feel safe, respected, and valued. I didn't know I could feel like this again." Their connection, forged through shared hardship and quiet understanding, had blossomed into something profound. It was not instant or fiery. It was steady, enduring, and deeply rooted in trust and respect. The land had taught them patience, resilience, and careful observation, and those lessons had carried into their relationship. Over the next few weeks, they continued to work together, their bond growing stronger with each shared challenge. They celebrated small victories, the successful repair of a fence, the safe delivery of a calf, or the completion of a day's hard labor. Each accomplishment reinforced their partnership, their respect, and their affection. They began to share more personal stories, laughter, and quiet moments, discovering common ground and mutual understanding. One afternoon, while gathering hay near the barn, Clara stumbled slightly, and Eli reached out instinctively to steady her. Their hands touched, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to pause. Neither spoke, but both felt the unspoken acknowledgement of their growing feelings. It was a quiet intimacy, born not from words or declarations, but from shared experience and the deep trust they had built. Later that evening, as they prepared the animals for the night, Clara paused and looked at Eli. "I never thought I'd find a place where I truly belong," she said quietly. "But this feels right, with you, with the ranch, with everything." Eli's eyes softened as he listened. "I've spent years alone," he replied. "But you've made me see that life can be richer, fuller, that there's more than just work and survival. There's trust and connection and hope. Their words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. The hardships they had faced, the dangers they had overcome, and the trust they had built had led them to this moment, a realization that they were no longer merely companions but partners in life and in the challenges that lay ahead. As summer drew to a close, the ranch had never been in better condition. The cattle thrived, the fields were fertile, and the fences were strong. But more importantly, Eli and Clara had found a new equilibrium, an understanding and partnership that went beyond the physical tasks of ranch life. They had learned to rely on one another, to trust implicitly, and to face the future together. One evening, under a sky painted with the colors of sunset, Eli and Clara stood together on the porch, looking out over the land. The ranch stretched before them, a testament to their hard work, resilience, and partnership. Clara rested her hand lightly on Eli's arm, and he placed his hand over hers, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. "You've changed everything," Eli said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that he had not expressed before. Clara smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and belonging. "And you've changed my life too," she replied. "I never imagined I could feel this way again, but here I am." In the weeks that followed, life at the ranch continued with the familiar rhythm of work and routine. Yet there was a new dimension to their days, a quiet joy, a sense of partnership, and an understanding that they could face whatever challenges came their way. The past, with all its hardships and scars, had shaped them but no longer defined them. They had found strength in each other, and in doing so, had created a home built not just on land, but on trust, respect, and love. The final test of their resilience came one late afternoon when a sudden fire broke out in a distant section of the pasture. Smoke rose quickly, carried by the wind, and the smell of burning grass filled the air. Eli and Clara sprang into action, coordinating the efforts to protect the animals and contain the blaze. They worked tirelessly, using water from the stream, clearing brush, and guiding the cattle to safety. Their teamwork was flawless, their trust in each other absolute. By the time the fire was under control, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the scorched fields. They were exhausted, yet there was a sense of triumph in their eyes, a recognition that together they could overcome any obstacle. As night fell, they sat together by the fire, hands intertwined, the warmth of the flames reflecting the warmth in their hearts. They had faced danger, hardship, and uncertainty, yet emerged stronger and more connected than ever. Eli realized that life on the ranch was no longer just about survival. It was about partnership, connection, and hope for the future. Clara understood that she had finally found a place where she belonged, a place where she was safe, valued, and loved. And so, on that quiet night, with the stars shining above and the ranch peacefully resting, Eli and Clara knew that everything had changed. Their lives had been shaped by the challenges they had faced, the trust they had built, and the courage they had discovered in each other. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined them. They were reminders of strength, endurance, and the journey that had brought them together. For Eli and Clara, the Wild West was no longer just a harsh, unpredictable land. It had become a place of hope, resilience, and new beginnings. Together, they would face whatever came next, confident in their partnership, their bond, and the love that had grown quietly but powerfully between them. And in that knowledge, they found a peace and fulfillment that neither had thought possible when their paths first crossed on the dusty trail leading to the ranch.